Millionaire's daughter spoke for first time, after meeting a black street musician. "We don't allow street performers at private charity galas. Security will escort you out immediately. I'm not leaving until Elizabeth Warren hears me play. Her father invited me here tonight." The security guard's face flushed with anger as he grabbed Marcus Johnson's arm, attempting to pull the well-dressed black man away from the entrance to the grand ballroom. The crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the marble floors where Hartford's elite mingled in their finest evening wear, champagne flutes in hand, oblivious to the confrontation unfolding at the doorway. But Marcus stood his ground, saxophone case clutched firmly in one hand, the invitation card extended in the other. His eyes remained fixed on someone across the room, a young woman in a pale blue gown sitting silently beside Connecticut's wealthiest real estate developer, Harold Warren. "Sir, please release my arm," Marcus said calmly, though his heart raced. "Mr. Warren personally requested I perform tonight. This is about his daughter." The security guard tightened his grip. "I don't care what you think you're doing here. This is a $5,000-a-plate fundraiser, not some street corner." The commotion was drawing attention now. Conversations nearby had quieted. Harold Warren himself looked up from his table, recognition dawning on his face as he saw Marcus at the entrance. Beside him, Elizabeth, 24 years old and silent for the past 15 years, straightened in her chair, her eyes widening. "That's enough, Phillips," Harold's authoritative voice cut through the tension as he approached. "Mr. Johnson is here at my invitation." The security guard immediately released Marcus, stepping back with visible confusion. Harold Warren extended his hand to Marcus, an unexpected gesture that sent murmurs through the watching crowd. "I apologize for the misunderstanding," Harold said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the musician I mentioned earlier. He'll be providing tonight's special performance." Marcus nodded respectfully, but his eyes drifted past Harold to Elizabeth, who was now standing, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her lips parted as if on the verge of something momentous. The room fell completely silent as Elizabeth Warren took a single step forward. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice emerging after 15 years of silence. The single word hung in the air like a revelation. Harold Warren froze, turning slowly toward his daughter, disbelief etched across his face. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Marcus Johnson was playing his saxophone in Bushnell Park, unaware that this ordinary Friday afternoon would change multiple lives forever. Marcus set up his usual spot near the Rose Garden, where the acoustics bounced nicely off the nearby pavilion. At 48, he'd been playing in this same location for nearly 2 decades, through economic booms and busts, through winter snows and summer heat. Today was a perfect late September day in 1985, crisp enough for his tweed jacket, but warm enough that office workers might linger during lunch breaks. He'd been a promising student at Juilliard once, back in the 60s, before Vietnam changed everything. The war had taken 2 fingers from his left hand and given him nightmares that still woke him 3 nights a week, but it couldn't take his music. He'd adapted, developed his own technique, and found that the park offered something the concert halls never had: real people, unfiltered emotions, and occasionally unexpected connections. "The usual, Mr. Johnson?" called Mario from the hot dog cart nearby. "You know it," Marcus replied, setting out his open case for tips. The familiar ritual hot dog with mustard and sauerkraut, can of Coca-Cola Classic, preceded every Friday session. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this. As Marcus ate his lunch, he watched the park's patterns. Secretaries power-walking in sneakers with their office shoes in handbags, businessmen loosening ties in the sunshine, mothers with strollers navigating the winding paths. The rhythms of the city were as familiar to him as a well-worn standard. At precisely 12:30, he wiped his hands, positioned his saxophone, and began to play Autumn in New York. The melody floated across the park, drawing a few regular listeners who dropped dollars into his case before hurrying back to offices. Marcus nodded thanks without interrupting his music, eyes half closed as he leaned into the familiar tune. He didn't notice the black Lincoln Town car that pulled to a stop at the curb, or the distinguished older man who emerged and stood listening for several minutes. Only when the song ended and applause came from an unexpected direction did Marcus open his eyes to see Harold Warren, whose face he recognized from countless newspaper business sections, standing before him. "That was extraordinary," said Warren, his tailored suit and commanding presence drawing stares from passers-by. "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied, surprised. Appreciate you listening. Harold Warren wasn't known for wandering through parks or listening to street musicians. His name adorned half the new buildings downtown, and rumor had it the governor called him for advice, not the other way around. "How long have you been playing here?" Warren asked, remaining in place while his driver waited patiently by the car. "About 20 years, give or take," Warren nodded thoughtfully. "Every day, weekdays. Fridays are my favorite. People are more generous heading into the weekend." Marcus smiled, curious about the line of questioning. Warren seemed to be considering something significant. "My daughter Elizabeth used to love this park, especially the Rose Garden." His voice softened. "She hasn't spoken a word since she was 9 years old." Marcus wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected confidence. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. The doctors call it selective mutism, triggered by trauma. She was there when her mother's car went off Founder's Bridge." Warren's gaze drifted toward the skyline where the bridge was just visible. "She hasn't made a sound since that day." Not a word, not a laugh, not even a cry. Marcus set his saxophone carefully in its stand. "That's a heavy burden for anyone to carry, especially a child." "She's 24 now," Warren continued, pulling out his wallet. "She sits in her window every Friday watching this park. I've noticed her watching you play, though she's too far to actually hear the music." Marcus remained silent, sensing there was more to this conversation. "I'm hosting a charity gala tonight at the Hilton," Warren said, extracting not the expected tip, but an embossed invitation card. "Elizabeth will be there. She attends these functions out of duty but remains silent throughout. Would you consider performing? I'd pay your standard professional rate, of course." "With all due respect, Mr. Warren, I don't think my presence at your gala will make your daughter speak again." "Perhaps not," Warren acknowledged. "But for 15 years, I've tried everything, the finest physicians, therapists, specialists from around the world. Nothing has worked. But she watches you, Mr. Johnson. Something about your music reaches her in a way I don't understand." Marcus studied the wealthy man before him. Despite the tailored suit and air of command, Harold Warren looked in this moment simply like a father desperate to help his child. "I'm not exactly gala material." Marcus gestured to his worn tweed jacket and the case with perhaps $40 in tips. "I'll send appropriate attire to whatever address you provide. The event begins at 7:30. Warren held out the invitation. "What do you say?" Marcus hesitated only briefly before accepting the card. "I'll be there, but I'll bring my own suit. Still fits from my Juilliard days." A look of surprise crossed Warren's face. "You studied at Juilliard?" "Before Vietnam." "Long time ago now." Warren's expression shifted with this new information. "I look forward to your performance tonight, Mr. Johnson." He handed Marcus a business card with a number scribbled on the back. "Call this line directly if there are any issues with entry." As Warren walked back to his waiting car, Marcus turned the invitation over in his hands, wondering what exactly he'd agreed to. The park suddenly seemed quieter, as if the city itself was holding its breath at this intersection of two very different worlds. Across town, in the Warren estate overlooking the Connecticut River, Elizabeth sat at her window watching the distant figures in the park through high-powered binoculars. From this third-floor perch in her childhood bedroom, where she'd returned after graduating silently from Vassar, she could just make out the familiar figure of the saxophone player. She couldn't hear him, but over the years she'd learned to read the music in his movements, the way he swayed with ballads, the sharp punctuations of livelier pieces. Elizabeth hadn't chosen silence. At first, after watching her mother's car break through the bridge railing and disappear into the dark water below, she tried desperately to scream, to call out, to form any sound at all. But her voice had simply vanished, locked away behind a door she couldn't find. Eventually, the armies of specialists had stopped coming, and her father had accepted her silence as permanent. Only she knew the truth. That word sometimes formed in her throat now, pressing against her lips like visitors at a door she was afraid to open. What if she spoke and the wrong words came out? What if her first words after 15 years weren't perfect? The pressure of that first utterance had built into an insurmountable wall. She set down the binoculars when she noticed her father's car entering the park. Curious, she watched as he approached the saxophone player. Their conversation appeared brief but significant, judging by her father's body language. When he handed something to the musician, Elizabeth felt a flutter of unexpected interest. Her father had tried so many cures over the years, would this be another? Part of her resented the endless parade of specialists and therapies. Another part desperately wished one would work. She was tired of living half a life, communicating through notepads and gestures, seeing the pity in people's eyes when they realized she wouldn't speak. Elizabeth turned from the window when she heard a soft knock at her door. Mrs. Collins, the housekeeper who had been with the family since before Elizabeth's birth, entered carrying a garment bag. "Your father called, dear. He asked me to make sure the blue Dior is ready for tonight's gala." Mrs. Collins hung the bag on the closet door. "He seemed quite insistent you wear this particular dress, though Lord knows why. You look lovely in all of them." Elizabeth nodded her thanks, crossing to her desk where she wrote on a notepad, "Something special happening tonight." Mrs. Collins read the note and shrugged. "Just the usual charity affair for the Children's Hospital, though your father did mention a special musical performance." She gave Elizabeth a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Car will be ready at 7:00, dear." After Mrs. Collins left, Elizabeth unzipped the garment bag to reveal the pale blue gown she'd worn to her college graduation. Her father had bought it in Paris, believing its beauty might somehow inspire her to speak at the ceremony. It hadn't, of course, but she'd loved the dress nonetheless. Why this particular gown tonight? She crossed back to the window, picking up the binoculars again, but the saxophone player had already packed up and gone. An unusual sense of anticipation filled her as she considered the evening ahead. Back in his modest apartment on the west side of Hartford, Marcus carefully removed his charcoal gray suit from the back of his closet. 20 years since he'd worn it for his final recital at Juilliard before shipping out to Vietnam. He'd kept himself fit through the decades, but still held his breath as he tried on the pants. They fit, though perhaps a bit more snugly than before. As he polished his shoes, the television played the evening news in the background, something about tensions with the Soviet Union and President Reagan's latest speech. Marcus only half listened, his mind on the unusual turn his day had taken. Playing for the city's elite was far from his usual venue, but the opportunity to earn a professional fee appealed to his practical side. The mysterious story of the silent daughter intrigued him as well. Marcus had seen the power of music to reach people in ways words couldn't. Wounded men in field hospitals finding momentary peace, children transfixed by a simple melody, elderly dementia patients suddenly lucid when hearing songs from their youth. He opened his saxophone case, checking that everything was in perfect order. The instrument had been his constant companion through good times and bad. He'd pawned his television, his father's watch, even his wedding ring after the divorce, but never the saxophone. Some things were too essential to who you are. Marcus selected several pieces for the evening, a mix of jazz standards and classical adaptations that would suit a formal event while still showcasing his particular style. If the Millionaire wanted to pay him to play for a silent young woman, he would deliver a performance worth remembering. By 6:30, Marcus was dressed and ready, his saxophone case in hand as he waited for the taxi he'd called. He caught his reflection in the hallway mirror, a dignified black man in his late 40s, silver threading through his close-cropped hair, the suit well-worn but elegant. The missing fingers on his left hand were barely noticeable unless you knew to look. "Not bad, Johnson," he murmured to himself. "Not bad at all." The taxi arrived precisely on time, and Marcus gave the driver the address of the downtown Hilton. As they drove through the city, he watched Hartford transform from his working-class neighborhood to the gleaming financial district where Harold Warren had built his empire. The Hilton's grand entrance was already bustling with arriving guests, men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns stepping from luxury cars. Marcus paid the taxi driver and approached the hotel with his saxophone case, suddenly aware of the social gulf he was crossing. But the invitation card in his pocket gave him confidence as he walked through the revolving door into the lobby. The charity gala occupied the hotel's grand ballroom with a check-in table positioned at the entrance. Marcus approached, presenting his invitation to a young woman with a guest list. "Good evening," he said politely. "Marcus Johnson. I'm tonight's musical performer." The woman scanned her list with a frown. "I don't see a Marcus Johnson listed as entertainment. We have the Hartford String Quartet scheduled. Mr. Warren personally invited me this afternoon. Perhaps it was a last-minute addition. I'm sorry, sir, but everyone must be on the list." Her tone remained professional but firm. "The security protocols for these events are quite strict." Marcus reached for the business card Warren had given him. He provided this number in case of any issues. Before he could place the call, a security guard approached, drawn by the minor disruption to the check-in flow. "Is there a problem here?" And that's when the confrontation began that would lead to the scene where we started. "We don't allow street performers at private charity galas. Security will escort you out immediately." "I'm not leaving until Elizabeth Warren hears me play. Her father invited me here tonight." Now back to where we started, with Elizabeth Warren speaking her first word in 15 years, the name of the musician who had just arrived. "Marcus," she whispered again, her voice stronger this time as she took another step forward. The room remained frozen in collective shock. Harold Warren moved toward his daughter with trembling hands, as if afraid any sudden movement might break the spell. "Elizabeth?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded, tears filling her eyes, but kept her gaze fixed on Marcus. "I want to hear him play," she said, each word clear and deliberate, as if selecting them carefully from a vocabulary unused for 15 years. The assembled crowd, Hartford's wealthiest and most influential citizens, remained utterly silent, witnesses to a moment that felt almost sacred in its unexpectedness. Harold turned to Marcus, who still stood at the entrance, saxophone case in hand. "Please," was all the millionaire could manage to say. Marcus nodded, moving toward the small stage that had been prepared for the string quartet. The formally dressed musicians looked confused but stepped aside as Marcus took center stage. He removed his saxophone from its case with practiced movements, all too aware of the extraordinary circumstances. Elizabeth had taken a seat in the front row, her father beside her, still looking stunned. Marcus made eye contact with her briefly before closing his eyes to center himself. Then, without introduction, he began to play Autumn in New York, the same melody he'd been performing when Harold Warren found him in the park. The notes filled the grand ballroom, somehow both intimate and expansive. Marcus played with his eyes closed at first, pouring everything into the music, his own journey from promise to loss to redemption, the daily dignity of continuing despite disappointments, the beauty that persisted even in difficult times. When he opened his eyes midway through the piece, he saw Elizabeth Warren watching him intently, tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling too, the expression of someone experiencing both release and revelation simultaneously. As the final notes faded, the room erupted in applause. Elizabeth stood, clapping with genuine enthusiasm, her face alive with emotion that had been locked away for years. Marcus acknowledged the applause with a modest bow. When the room quieted again, Elizabeth approached the stage. Harold moved to follow her, but then held back, sensing this moment belonged to his daughter alone. "I've watched you play from my window for years," Elizabeth said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I couldn't hear the music, but I could see how it moved through you." Marcus stepped down from the stage to meet her at eye level. "Music often says what words can't." "Yes," she agreed, the simple affirmation loaded with meaning. "That's exactly it." Harold joined them now, unsuccessfully trying to mask his emotional state. "I don't understand," he said. "All these years, all those specialists." Elizabeth turned to her father. "The specialist wanted me to explain why I couldn't speak." "How could I explain something I didn't understand myself?" She gestured toward Marcus. "But his music isn't asking anything from me, it's just authentic." The moment was interrupted by the event coordinator, who approached with obvious confusion about the change in musical program. Harold waved her away impatiently. "The string quartet can wait," he said firmly. "Mr. Johnson will continue his performance." Marcus looked between father and daughter. "Actually, I have a suggestion if you're open to it." Both Warrens looked at him expectantly. "I'd be honored to play with the quartet, a collaboration if they're willing." The coordinator was dispatched to discuss this possibility with the musicians, who quickly agreed, intrigued by the unexpected turn of events. As they set up, Marcus spoke quietly with them, suggesting a piece they all would know. Meanwhile, Elizabeth turned to her father. "I'm sorry for all these years of silence," she said. Harold shook his head. "Don't apologize, not ever, I just—" He struggled to find the right words. "I just want to understand what happened. Today, I mean." Elizabeth considered this. "I've been watching him play from my window for years, something about seeing him here in this world." She gestured to the ornate ballroom, made me realize how separated my life has become, divided between before and after, speech and silence. Her father listened intently, hanging on each word as if they might disappear again. "When they tried to remove him, it was like watching two parts of my life collide, and suddenly speaking didn't seem impossible anymore." She took her father's hand. "The words have been there all along, waiting. I just couldn't find the door." The quartet had taken their positions, with Marcus standing slightly in front. The unusual ensemble began to play Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, with Marcus's saxophone taking the clarinet's opening glissando. The familiar piece, reimagined through this unexpected collaboration, captivated the audience. As the music filled the room, Elizabeth and Harold returned to their seats. Other guests gradually resumed their seats as well, the charity gala continuing but transformed by what had transpired. During a brief intermission, Harold approached Marcus again. "I don't know how to thank you," he began. Marcus shook his head. "I didn't do anything, Mr. Warren. Your daughter found her own voice." "Nevertheless," Warren continued, "you were the catalyst. Name your price, whatever you want." Marcus considered this for a moment. I don't want your money, Mr. Warren. Everyone wants something, Warren replied, the businessman in him emerging even in this emotional moment. True enough, Marcus conceded. The community center in my neighborhood is closing next month. The building needs repairs the city won't fund. That place gives kids a safe place to go after school, keeps them from the streets. Some of them are learning music there. Understanding dawned in Warren's eyes. Consider it done. I'll have my foundation purchase the building outright and fund its programs for the next 10 years, Marcus added, surprising himself with his boldness. Warren smiled, extending his hand. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Johnson, but it's done. As they shook hands, Elizabeth approached, carrying a glass of water for Marcus. You must be thirsty, she said, offering the glass. Thank you, he replied, accepting it gratefully. Your father and I were just discussing the future of the Pine Street Community Center. The one with the mural of Duke Ellington? She asked, revealing how much attention she'd paid to his world from her distant window. I'd like to visit it sometime. Both men looked surprised at this statement. I think that could be arranged, Marcus said with a smile. They could use volunteer music teachers. Elizabeth's eyes lit up at the suggestion, and Harold Warren recognized something he hadn't seen in his daughter for 15 years, a sense of purpose. The remainder of the evening unfolded with an energy unlike any previous Warren charity event. Elizabeth moved through the crowd, speaking briefly but warmly with guests who had known only her silence for years. The music continued, the unusual collaboration between Marcus and the string quartet creating something more meaningful than either would have produced alone. By midnight, as the gala wound to a close, 3 lives had been irrevocably changed. Elizabeth Warren had found her voice again. Harold Warren had received the miracle he'd stopped believing was possible, and Marcus Johnson had crossed a threshold into a world that might have remained forever separate from his own. 2 weeks later, the Pine Street Community Center received not only a complete renovation, but an expansion that included a proper music room with instruments donated by the Warren Foundation. Marcus was offered a position as musical director, with a salary that allowed him to focus on teaching rather than playing in the park for tips. Elizabeth began volunteering 3 afternoons a week, working with young children just beginning to explore music. Her psychology degree from Vassar, unused until now, proved valuable as she developed programs specifically for children processing trauma through artistic expression. Harold Warren, true to his nature, leveraged the extraordinary story into networking opportunities, but with a genuinely changed perspective. The man who had built an empire of steel and glass now spoke passionately about community investment and the healing power of the arts. Some cynics suggested it was all for publicity, but those closest to the situation recognized a genuine transformation. 6 months after the gala, Marcus and Elizabeth sat on a bench in Bushnell Park near his old performing spot. Spring was just beginning to transform the landscape, new growth emerging from what had appeared lifeless through the winter months. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Elizabeth asked, watching children play on the newly installed playground equipment, another Warren Foundation project. Not in my wildest dreams, Marcus admitted. Though I've learned life rarely follows the expected path. Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. When my mother died, I thought my life was over too. The silence wasn't really a choice. It was the only response that made sense at the time. And now? Now I understand that healing isn't about going back to who you were before. It's about becoming someone new, someone who carries the past but isn't defined by it. She smiled at him. You taught me that without saying a word. Music has always been my true voice, Marcus said. Even when I lost these, he held up his left hand with its missing fingers, I found a way to keep playing. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the park come to life around them. Their weekly meetings had become a ritual, a chance to step away from the community center and reflect on the journey they were sharing. My father's planning another gala, Elizabeth said eventually. Anniversary celebration for the Foundation's new arts initiative. He wants us to perform together. Marcus raised his eyebrows in surprise. Us? I didn't know you played an instrument. I don't, she admitted with a laugh, another sound that had returned to her life. But I've been taking voice lessons. Thought maybe we could try a song together. The suggestion touched Marcus deeply. I'd be honored. Any particular song in mind? What a wonderful world, she suggested. Too obvious. Sometimes the obvious choice is the right one, he replied with a warm smile. Louis Armstrong would approve. As they walked back toward the community center together, Marcus reflected on how a simple afternoon in the park had set in motion changes neither of them could have foreseen. Elizabeth's voice had returned. But she'd given him something equally valuable, a new purpose, a broader canvas for his music, and a friendship that defied the usual boundaries of age, race, and social position. The Warren family name now graced not just downtown skyscrapers, but also community spaces throughout Hartford's underserved neighborhoods. Harold had discovered that using his influence to open doors for others brought a satisfaction that acquiring more wealth never had. And throughout the city, people who had witnessed Elizabeth speak that first word at the gala told the story again and again, a modern-day miracle that reminded them of life's unexpected harmonies, the healing power of authentic connection, and the music that exists in the spaces between words. As autumn returned to Hartford, Marcus once again played Autumn in New York in Bushnell Park. But this time, Elizabeth Warren sat beside him on the bench, adding her voice to his melody, each of them stronger for having found the other, each note a testament to the transformative power of being truly seen and heard. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.